Hello and welcome to another edition of the Crypto Club and Digital Assets Weekly Catch-Up on Zoom. It is Sunday the 1st September 2024, and as is always the case, we never quite know what we're going to be talking about. These sessions really depend upon who comes and joins us and what they want to talk about, but quite often we'll be discussing blockchains, layer 1, layer 2 solutions, Bitcoin, Ethereum, market news, DeFi, NFTs, ICOs, STOs, metaverse, central bank digital currencies, so many other things, really. If you'd like to come and join us for a future session, there are details in the comments below. Just click on the link and find out the information. And as I say, we hold these every Sunday, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. UK time, open to everybody, novices and experts alike. So if you're new to the crypto world and you're beginning to learn what all these strange phrases and terms are, come along and ask questions. Or if you're running a project and you'd like to share details about what your initiative is, come along and join us in a future session where we can hold our Gone in 3 minutes, where you have 180 seconds to talk about what your project is doing, how it works, and anything else you'd like to share. So with that, let's see who's going to come and join us today.
Greetings from Aqaba, the Jordan.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think we've had anyone join us from Jordan previously. It's another country to add to the collection.
Well, I'm here for SOFEX 2024, which is a special operations forces kind of tech expo, which is a big thing here. And so yeah, interesting.
Very nice, excellent. Yeah. And is there a crypto connection there, as in cryptocurrency as opposed to crypto?
I mean, the answer is that, well, to find me a place where there is not a crypto connection. I think is probably the better way of putting it. But no, I mean, I wouldn't say directly, but easily would be, should be, probably is.
Well, I've certainly seen it before now, where I've seen things like battlefield surveillance systems and was it 5 Eyes, 5 C's, 5 C's, so command, communication, computes, and something else. I've seen solutions for the battlefield using cryptography and blockchain-based solutions as the backbone. So
that's exactly what this is really all about. And I'm primarily here with my authentication hat on, but it's all the same direction and same interest.
So is your area mainly around like digital identity and
verification? I mean, that's my background is from Barclays way back 20 years ago, where 1.0 nearly 25 years ago. Terrifying.
Time flies when you're enjoying yourself, hey?
Oh, no, very, very true.
Yeah, very good. I've just been joined by JT, who's got a new avatar or a new backdrop.
I'll go on to mute. Brilliant.
Yeah. Okay. No problem. Well, welcome aboard. Anyway, hey JT.
Oh yeah.
Hey. Just saying, John is out in Jordan at the moment, which is a country I don't think we've had anyone connecting in from previously. We've had Dubai, Abu Dhabi, South Africa, East Coast USA, West Coast USA, South America. So yeah, I think Jordan's a new country to add to the collection. What are you saying? He's there from a security expo or conference. So we're just chatting about the digital identity opportunities there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess digital identity and crypto and security, they're kind of overlapping quite well at the moment. But it's interesting. We've seen the news with what's going on with the likes of Pavel Durov and Telegram and that, where governments are wanting less and less of citizens' privacy, and citizens are wanting more and more of it. So we're in an interesting time. But we won't go too deeply into that because I think we started talking about that last week, and I decided to not publish some of that info. So for either of you, any news or anything in particular of interest you'd like to share this week?
For me, no, I'm really just interested in keeping in touch with what goes on and looking forward to Mansion House in 10 days' time, 2 weeks' time.
Okay. Yeah, James always puts on an excellent events with the digital community. So
Yeah,
often, sorry, Digital Commonwealth Group, as I think it's branded these days.
that's it.
Yeah, so it should be excellent. Yeah, yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what things are. But what I'm beginning to find, and this is no criticisms of James's events, but I'm beginning to find with most blockchain events, it's almost feeling like Groundhog Day, that we seem to be going around in circles around, still talking about use cases, still talking about the potential of the technology. I'm not seeing anything being productionized as such yet. I don't know if either of you got any thoughts around that. Of are we still at the as Gartner would describe it, the peak of inflated expectations, I guess, before we hit the trough of disillusionment.
I mean, for what I could add, the answer is yes. But I think that many people are not surprised, because what it represents is a huge change to the status quo and the role of government, the role of corporate, and all the rest of it. And so it is not at all surprising that this architecture will take maybe years to actually get through. But like all things, it's not going to go away, and it will find the right early use cases, and then will evolve from then on. But it does represent, in my view, a huge challenge to the status quo.
Mm. I think you're right, and it's one of
In
those
what way?
things
Sorry.
of what problem does it solve? Go on, JT.
Yeah, I was just asking in what way exactly.
In what way does it pose a challenge?
Yeah.
Well, if you think about the way, particularly things like information security and in my little field of digital identity, it tends historically to have been top down. It tends to have been primarily like a pyramid. There's something at the top of the pyramid, and then a whole lot of things that come off the pyramid. And whether it's a central bank or whether it's a root certificate authority or whatever it is, there's something at the top of the pyramid. Where, of course, with distributed ledger-based architecture, there is no pyramid. The whole ledger is what you end up trusting, not any individual component within it. And I'm no tech, but my Bible on all of this is something called Blockchain and the New Architecture of Trust, which is a book written by Kevin Werbach, Werbach, which I have found far the most interesting from a kind of intellectual perspective as to what this distributed ledger architecture really means to the status quo, whether you measure that by corporate structures or nation state structures, government structures, or whatever. But there's no doubt in my mind that it does represent a change to the status quo, and as such, it will take a long while to work through.
Yeah, I've been through this, several times due to my background as well. And my view is that, look, it's all about power with governments, yeah, and having that control. And it's getting worse and worse every day, as we know, yeah. And it always depends on who controls the ledger, because majority of the ledgers, if they're going to be implemented by a government, they want to have control of it. Otherwise, they will not even touch it. Yeah, it's as simple as that. So governments will not accept anything that is going to erode their power. That's the first thing I noticed, being on this for 13, 14 years already, okay? And been there with security products as well. Founded with a co-founder a security that had security platform that had blockchain at the core, yeah. And that was one of the reasons why we done it, was so we could actually help governments to secure pretty much most, and big enterprises, of course, to secure their IT environments, yeah. And you wouldn't believe it, the things we've gone through, whenever we talk to people, doesn't matter what their background was, they were not interested, because anything that challenges that status quo, anything that erodes power from them, they are not going to implement. Now, when you look at identity, that's a very good example, No government will put the identity, of their citizens on any public blockchain. It doesn't matter. We can talk about ideals. Ideally, yes, we all want to do that. The citizens want to do that. It's fully decentralized, and we can talk about that in a minute, Governments will not do that. They will do it on a ledger that is centralized and that they can control. Okay, so that means it's the same thing as a database. It's a different technology. It's still a database. Blockchain is still a database. It's decentralized database. If you decentralize, who runs the nodes and to do all the validation, etc. Okay, so then we can discuss about decentralization. But let's say a government accepts to go to blockchain, a public blockchain, then the discussion is decentralized. So decentralized, how many nodes are out there, who actually developed the cryptography for that blockchain, Then all these questions about security starts to come on. It triggers in, and you'll find that if they don't have access somehow to control it, then it's not going to work for them. And this is a discussion to have, and I don't think we'll ever be able to implement proper decentralized identity. We can do all of that as citizens, many projects and so on, but when it actually comes to identify the actual citizen, in the end, it is done through centralized systems. And if they don't accept, if they don't implement those decentralized systems, they still want to know who were the people actually doing those transactions online. And that is from the off-ramps, which happens always on centralized exchanges. It always ends up, the state always want to have control in identifying who is doing what. They will never accept anything that they don't know there is. And then we can start to talk about, okay, there's technologies out there, that allows people not share all their data, but still identify who that person is. We know what's that, ZK.
John, weren't you involved in something a while ago? Was it Identiv or Trust?
Identrust, that's right, which was using regulated entities like banks, farmers, and those and insurance companies. So we weren't actually using governments to do the KYC and the issuance of digital credentials. And we were doing it under a common law-based framework analogous to Visa and MasterCard in the 1960s. And at the time, which was Web 1.0, it was to me, I left Barclays to do this, and it was a really fascinating journey. And I think, I think the West as a whole had missed a huge opportunity by not adopting it more fully. The challenge, of course, now is that the underlying technology has moved away from that triangular root CA type of structure to this distributed ledger. And I hear all you say about government not letting go and all that good stuff. But it may not happen in my generation. It may not happen in any of our generations on this call. But once such technology is in place, and once the efficiencies that come out of it are evident in anything near a democratic society, it's going to be very hard to for the state just to hold on to power in the old-fashioned sense.
I guess that's always the challenge that we're kind of alluding to. The word decentralized, by its very definition, means no central ownership or no central management. And governments tend to like to be at the center of these things. So in a way, you can understand why they're cautious about how a potentially decentralized solution could do away with the government role in this. But I find the whole thing of identity and authentication and verification fascinating. because people sometimes get it all mixed up. And this is where, when we start talking about decentralized solutions, I think JT's right that governments don't want to give up that capability. And I guess the stuff you used to work on then, John, is that more aligned with what the UK's been reworking on its digital identity premise lately, where they used to have a series of organizations who acted as identity validators for the government gateway initiative? Was that more?
Yeah, I mean, that was right. That was a classic government reaction to what we were doing in the private sector with the regulated financial institutions. And the British government had something called Project Verify, which was a classic government-led central structure. The only problem was that it worked very well inside, well, it didn't really, but it could have worked very well for government applications within the UK geographic domain, but it wasn't actually, you couldn't possibly use your verified credential for if you were a treasurer of some company doing transactions with counterparties in China or in the United States or anywhere else, because it was purely a domestically focused government-centric structure, a bit like, analogous to a passport in many ways, which the application of that piece of paper simply allows me to go across a border or not. The fact that we use it for lots of other purposes is neither here nor there. The government accepts no liability for your use of it any place else. The only thing government vaguely accepts some liability for with a passport is if I do get stuck the wrong side of a border, there's some chance that the British government will get me back again. And of course, the liability structure in something like Project Verify, which was that government digital services type effort run by Cabinet Office, was that there was no liability structure behind it, no common law set of contracts or anything else that underpin dispute resolution or what happened if it went wrong and all that good stuff. So you're quite right. There was something, but it never took off, and and it never would. There's a lesson in that as well.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, with the Verify scheme, the government's changed it now as well. That they've almost like handed it off to private organisations. So I think the likes of the post office and some banks are allowed to still operate it, but it's not actually a government-run scheme anymore, I don't think.
That's correct. Yeah, it's not actually. I mean, it's very domestic, very limited number of applications, and yes, people like Barclays, who were one of the founders, ironically, of Identrust, but people like Barclays politically are perfectly happy to, have a relationship with this government structure, but it's very domestic focused and very limited in its in terms of the liability structure that sits behind it.
Because I guess the domestic aspect is interesting, because the one that everyone always raises when you start talking about digital identity schemes and citizens on the blockchain is the Estonian passport scheme with the Estonian e-register.
Yep.
And I know that was very much around providing the ability of having an identity scheme that you could use to validate who you were as a business. I know a few people who did that just before UK voted on the Brexit thing. But again, it never quite made the global digital identity side of things. But I guess that was kind of Web 2.0 version of it. So it'll be interesting to see what the Web 3 kind of thing is. I don't know, Ken joined us before, and I know Ken's into Web 3 and that kind of stuff. Ken, any thoughts around digital identity and decentralization?
Well, the one that I'm looking at the moment is the WorldCoin. They've been getting a lot of pushback in a lot of countries at the moment. But just as you mentioned, the Estonian scheme, the way they rolled that one out was you had to physically go to their embassy. So let's say you're abroad, let's say you're in London and you wanted to get the e-Estonian digital registration, you'd have to go to the embassy and they would take basically your biometrics, take your biometrics and at the embassy, and then they'll issue the document, which then would allow you to open up a business in Estonia without actually physically going to Estonia. Latvia as well has rolled. Latvia, actually, all the Baltics, I think, have rolled out that program. But yeah, it's still very centralized in that the government has to take your biometric data and store it in a centralized database. The World Coin is very interesting, but the problem I have with WorldCoin is low flow in terms of the coins. So the founders still hold a whole load of coins percentage wise, and therefore, is it really decentralized if if the VCs hold, I don't know, 80% of the tokens? But it's definitely an area that I think it's definitely ripe for for innovation. It's a very interesting area.
And WorldCoin's been having some problems with data protection lately, hasn't it? If I remember correctly, I think various governments are concerned because they were doing, as you say, with the Estonian government, where they collect biometric data. But with WorldCoin, wasn't this where they had like an iris reader?
Yeah, so
something.
with WorldCoin, they had like agents, so they raised a lot of money, so they were able to create this physical kind of like a device, and they have agents all over basically developing world, really. They've not done it in any developed countries. It's just developing countries, the poorer countries, where they basically saying, if you give us your your eye scan, we'll give you these coins, which is worth some money. Basically, it's kind of like, it's no way of inducing people, bribery, whatever you want to call it, to actually give up their
incentivizing.
Yeah. But yeah, so it rolled up. Initially, a lot of the countries were just let it happen. But after a while, a lot of the developing countries have been putting a lot of impediments to it, because they say they don't want their citizens giving up their biometric data or their, to effectively a private company. So that's where they're coming up with a lot of pushback.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. I mean, it's funny as well. I didn't realize Latvia had rolled out a electronic system, because I know that Estonia was always the kind of the poster child of the first generation of that.
Well, they were the innovators. They were the first to do it. And then obviously the other two, Lithuania and Latvia, just copied it, when they saw, because it has been extremely good for Estonia. They've had a lot of businesses, basically a lot of people from outside the EU have opened up businesses in Estonia, and it's generated tax revenue for the government. So the two neighbors looked at that and thought, well, we want a piece of that.
I know certainly Georgia was another country that implemented a very similar scheme. So it was interesting that it was kind of like the initial interest was around kind of like the former Soviet satellite countries, so some of the small ones. But it was fascinating as well with the Estonian one, the e-registry thing. I don't know, John, you and I may have been at the same meeting a few years ago, which was a cybersecurity event. And this was prior to Brexit. And I remember them talking about digital identity, and it was a really interesting panel. But they didn't mention anything about the Estonian scheme. And so afterwards, I actually said to the organizer and a couple of others, how come you didn't mention the Estonian e-registry scheme? And they all reached into their pockets and they all held up these ID cards and they said, oh, you mean these? Oh, what's this? And they all had Estonian e-registry cards. And I said, how come you've all got these? This is really interesting, I've never known this before. And they said, oh, well, we know it's not going to happen. But just in case, it's not going to happen, but just in case Britain voted in favour of Brexit, which we know was not going to happen, but just as a contingency, this is going to allow us to carry on operating in Europe. And I thought it was brilliant, because this was all small, niche, cybersecurity startup type people who had a contingency plan if the Brexit vote went the way it did, compared to the chaos that ensued with all the big businesses, all the banks, the insurance companies, everyone else, who just didn't have a contingency plan.
Yeah, it was. I think it used to be like 99 euros to get it, but I think it's now gone up in terms of cost. I mean, I should have got it then.
Yeah. And I think is it Janina, a blockchain girl? She used to be in the UK. She's moved to, I think she's still in Malta now. I think she was the first person to actually get one in the UK. So she used to show that off quite proudly at crypto events in London. So, but
Yeah, with Estonia, it's a lot easier now. You just apply online, fill the forms. Yeah, I think you need to send a CV, blah blah blah, fill all the documents, and then I think you have to wait something 3 to 5 weeks to pick up your identity kit at the embassy. Yeah, I think they have a pickup location in UK, in London and Scotland somewhere. I don't remember. And then it's quite straightforward. So 5 to 7 weeks, you have a digital identity of Estonia, yeah, and you can set up a company, you can set up bank accounts, you can pretty much set up everything after that, you know. They make it quite simple, but still, it's too complicated. 5 to 7 weeks to get a card, an identity card. I don't know. It's just digital identity, by the way, yeah, for non-residents, yeah.
But again, it tries to address the whole thing that, as John was talking about earlier on, I think, which was the more wider acceptance of a digital identity scheme beyond just a single national border, which is what's kind of needed, isn't it? If you think about most countries tend to still think of identity within their own host nation. I have
a Palau digital residency, by the way, since 2022. Right right from beginning. Wow. So there was a lot of folks talking that Vitalik got it and Tim Draper got it and a lot of people, and it was going to give a lot of benefits for any people in crypto and so on. So then I was offered, when everybody's talking about that, there was already a list of about 300,000 people waiting, believe it or not, you know, that applied online. Wow. So I managed to meet one of the guys that was helping the government there to run that. And, you know, 1 week later, I had it approved, you know. So I still have it. You have to renew it every year. But it just gives you an option for you to do other things if you want to, you know. It doesn't give you right to be a resident, yeah? It's just pure digital residency, nothing else, you know?
Okay, so it's kind of...
I was just going to say that the 3-4 weeks kind of waiting time, it just shows that the demand is out there for digital identity. And not a lot of people know about it. So for it to be 3-4 weeks, let's say months waiting list, it shows that demand in the people and the public is there. The demand is there. It's just how we can produce products that can actually service the demand.
Or simply that the process is very inefficient.
Yeah, governments.
Yeah, that's kind of thing. I mean, I have to admit that I had an experience not so long ago about renewing my UK passport, and on that, you know, that says it can take, I think that actually says 4 to 6 weeks just to renew your passport. And I actually wrote an article about it on LinkedIn because I think everyone should actually look at the UK government's passport renewal online process because it was phenomenal. It was incredibly easy to use, and the actual passport took just a few days. And the whole process was wonderful. Clearly, someone who works in digital customer journeys had been involved in this project because it just worked like clockwork. It was brilliant. And they were very clever at setting expectations in saying up front, so, you know, this may take 4 to 6 weeks. So straight away, your expectation set, okay, so it takes a few weeks. But then when it came back, I think it was 2 to 3 days later or something. It's a bit like, it used to be like that with US ESTAs. So the travel visas that they used to say, this can take ages or whatever. then it pops into your email an hour later or something. But I found the UK passport renewal process surprisingly good. So it's not all government departments that are inefficient. But yeah, it comes back
The
to
question, the question is always, what is it that for? What does it give you? Yeah, that you cannot get now. I can just go with my passport somewhere and still do the same things, you know? If it's not going to improve or make things faster for people, and I mean, there's a lot of conversations in many countries, but there are countries where you can do it if you get one of those cards, yeah, identity cards, and it's all already kind of in the government information systems. Yeah, you can actually do it. You just have a card reader at home. You stick that card into it, and you can log in and do everything that a citizen is supposed to do wherever they go. So, for example, in Portugal, there's what is called the citizen shop. Yeah. And there are lots of them across the country. And what it means is one place where people can do their passport, their identity card, their NHS card, you know, anything that is government related, yeah, it's all in one building. Okay. So what they've done then, they made it all possible through, because they actually put all the IT systems connected between all the departments. Yeah. What that enables is the citizen doesn't even need to go there in person anymore, unless if you are going to do the biometrics again for a new passport, yeah, or a new identity card. The rest, you just stick that card at home in your card reader, and you can log in and do all your digital services with that card. If that sort of thing is going to be implemented, then it's great. You know, let's implement whatever more with digital identity. If it's not going to give stuff like that, I couldn't be bothered to be, and like me, many other people, you know. So it's just, oh, let's create a digital identity, okay? And
so I guess the obvious one, and I know this starts making people feeling very uncomfortable, is when you start linking a digital identity scheme with a finance system, and you've got a central bank digital currency. So if you've got a central identity, why not link your financial stuff with it? That starts getting quite interesting quite quickly.
Yeah, I did a talk a couple of times, you know, 2018, 17, 18, and 19, where I was warning people about CBDCs and what they were coming. Yeah. It's actually, I think the first time was on the CC forum back, I don't know when it was, 2018 in London, yeah, where I actually put it on stage and say, hey, this is a ledger, okay? And what governments are going to do, and they're already doing, is when you are born, or if you're already a citizen, your identity is just a unique identifier, yeah, on that ledger. It's just a number, yeah, and that identifies you forever when you live and when you die. So think about that as a Merkle tree, and the trunk is that of the that ledger, yeah, that is just your identifies every single citizen in a country. Okay, then building those side chains, think a Merkle tree. Then you start to do exactly that. Yeah, you start to connect, enable on this side chain. You have the CBDC. Yeah, part of that side chain, you can create multiple side chains that connect to Bitcoin, to Ethereum, to whatever. Yeah. So that's all connected right down through all the trees, you know, right up to that trunk in the middle, which is the unique identifier of the individual. And I think that once all of that is connected, yeah, every company has an identity as well. Yeah, so it's not just individuals. Yeah, which represented on that trunk. Yeah, on that ledger. Then every single thing that a company does, yeah, buying, selling, paying salaries, you earning your salary, everything that is produced in the country and is spent, yeah, it's fully trackable. through those side chains, they all connect to that trunk in the middle, okay? So think the whole Merkle tree as side chains within side chains, and you build all of that. Then at any point in time, a government will be able to see how much the country is producing and how much a country is spending, okay? Now, the clever thing about that is that you can then start to put only not in smart contracts and automate economic policies. So you can control everything internally, but you can't control external factors, and there's a lot of external factors also impact on inflation and so on, but you can control then within your country by having all in smart contracts. You don't need to do anything. So you can increase supply of money, you can decrease it, you can do all of those economic policies fully on code without doing anything, because the system will know that it's all in a blockchain, how much we produce and how much we spend, what every single person spends, what every single person earns, plus goodbye tax evasion, because they'll be able to collect every single cent or penny of tax. I did this talk in 2017, 18, and look where we are today. We're getting closer and closer,
But it's interesting as well, because fascinating. Whenever people talk about digital identity, and I'm sure this is very much at the heart of John's whole thinking, but people often think about people identity. They don't necessarily think about corporate identity, because we've got things like CUSIP in the USA or CINS, CINS, which is more of a global register. But there's also the identity of things as well, where you want the ability not just to identify an individual or a company, but something as well. This is Gary's mobile phone, or this is a valid IoT device sending temperature data or whatever. And it's when you start looking at that, I find the whole thing around identity and the security of it just mind-boggling. It gets a big deal. John, is that something that, does your interest in identity go beyond people? Does it include objects?
Yes, it does. But at the end of the day, human beings have contractual relationships. If I'm corporate treasurer of a company, I have a set of contractual relationships with that company that authorize me to do certain things on behalf of that company. So a lot of the liability aspects of that credential and the way I use it are covered in contracts that lie between myself and the company, rather than between the company and any central authority.
Okay, because that's a really good point. I think one of the few good examples of a blockchain-based system, and I forget the name of the company now, but UK-based, and they do a whole capability around signatory lists. So for those who don't know, any company usually has a signatory list as to who can sign for expenses or payments and that. And a lot of these signatory lists, certainly up until recently, were manually maintained, which means you'd have situations where somebody was authorized to sign off a check or sign off a piece of work for like £1 million, dollars, euros, or whatever. But they left 6 months ago. But they've still got the signing authority, technically. And so I remember there was a really innovative way of introducing a blockchain-based signature scheme, which just allows companies to manage the digital register of who can sign for things. So I guess it kind of ties in with that. I think the other thing as well, and it's interesting with Lena being here. So Elena, I'm sure you just realised I was going to introduce this at some point. We've been talking about identity in terms of people, entities, and objects. That all kind of works when you can validate it. Ultimately, as was being said before, with the Estonian register, you can use biometrics, you can go in, you can physically check things. How does identity work in the metaverse? And any thoughts on that? I'm going to pick it on Elena because she's now my resident metaverse expert.
Thank you so much.
Uh,
Don't you think that the best way is to have an NFT tied to an identity?
that's an interesting idea, because I think you originally questioned that from the security perspective, if I remember correctly. Because I thought it was really, really interesting. The expression on your face is that you can't even remember doing it, I think. But you made a very good valid point a while ago about if people are using NFTs and they're linked to their identity, then that means if you can see their NFT, you can potentially figure out who somebody is and potentially link to their wallets.
I remember.
As well. Yeah. Which I thought was a fascinating thing. So yeah, I think you're right that you could potentially use something like an NFT in the metaverse. Well, I don't know. I'm going to throw it out for the conversation for everybody.
So yes, if this happens, if someone is identified in Web3 or in the metaverse via their NFT ID, it means they have to live with it. In the real world, we have only one identity. We have our financial records, educational records, medical details, all kind of tied up into our own one unique identity. And we are okay with that, aren't we? So then that's actually...
That's a very interesting question, though. Are we okay with that? Because
maybe not.
Yeah.
But that's the reality. So if it happens in the metaverse, then it makes the metaverse quite real or quite close to our real reality. We have one ID. We are bound to it. We use soul-bound NFTs, and we've got no ways of disguising ourselves or going incognito on the metaverse.
So that's an interesting point that you make. I was wondering, because John was saying before about how effectively you've got contracts between people. In the metaverse, though, what is the legal relationship for two parties?
Oh, to this, I can only say that is still to be defined.
And that's where I find all this stuff fascinating, because I think we keep coming up with technical solutions to things that aren't necessarily problems, but we introduce a whole range of new problems, like what is the legal status of a contract if it turns into...
Gary,
Go for John.
I've sad with time differences. I'm going to head off, but that's where this whole thing lies. I mean, 25 years ago, when we were building the Identitrust platform with that pyramid structure of a central root CA and then the banks hanging off that, that we underpinned it with a set of contractual relationships that bound the banks to the scheme, and a subset of those contractual relationships binding the users of the scheme, the bank customers, to the bank. And so there was a kind of chain of liability. Of course, with the distributed ledger environment, a lot of that detailed operating rule set that we built 25 years ago is now replaced by things that are called smart contracts. And so if X happens, then Y happens. So that, to me, that's the challenge of today, is that that governments and major global FIs and global institutions didn't grab this issue at Web 1.0, and we're now well into 3.0, and the world is actually moving ahead, whilst the banks and the governments are still sitting around back as they might have been 20 years ago, and that's a risk. Guys, I'm gonna have to excuse me, please. It's late here. I've got an early start, and fascinating conversation.
John, thanks for joining us. Look forward to learning any insights that you gain whilst you're at the conference.
Absolutely. Hopefully see you at Mansion House.
Indeed. So have a great time anyway. Cheers.
Thanks a lot, Gary. Okay, bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah, I guess for everyone else, again, it comes into this fascinating domain of, identity, legal compliance, or legal contracts and that kind of thing as to where it all fits. A really interesting area. So a fascinating conversation.
I mean, looking at stuff like that, the physical deepin kind of is another area that's quite interesting.
That's a good point. Yeah. So I haven't heard Deepin mentioned for a couple of weeks. So decentralized decentralized physical infrastructure. Where do you think that could fit with this then, Ken?
Well, I mean, you've got what's it called, a peak, and so they're branding themselves as I don't know, the number one. I think they call themselves layer one blockchain for deepin, but I mean, some of the people who are building on it at the moment seems to be a lot of like transportation. So they're probably trying to take on things like Uber and stuff like that. That some of the newer companies building on it. So it's kind of like coming from the ethos of the money goes into the middleman. Basically, they want to cut off the middleman, basically, so that the driver can make money, more money than they do at the moment, or and so forth. It's a very interesting thing, the deep in infrastructure. Loads of companies building on that. But if you're going to be paying somebody, then you're going to need their identity, basically, or it's very, it's one of those things. I think identity is actually going to be the root of a lot of blockchain stuff because governments, as JT said before, governments are not going to allow you to be anonymous. They want to collect their tax.
I think that's it. And it's fascinating as well, the conversations I get involved in where people are saying about, oh, well, blockchain and crypto, it's all decentralized, it's all, it's individual based and this kind of thing. Why does an exchange need my bank detail? Oh, sorry, not my bank details, but why does it need my identity details? Why does it need my passport? This kind of stuff. It's like, well, because all the regulated exchanges or the approved exchanges need to do KYC, so know your customer checking. And so the whole crypto world has kind of moved on from being one of these things where everyone does everything anonymously and privately, and that to this whole thing now where it's all corporate compliance and everyone needs to register and be approved and that kind of thing. Yeah,
I mean, yes and no, because for example, I mean, the EU's, I think it's called MiCA law or whatever it's called. It's just a piece of legislation, and I think it's going to hold Europe back in terms of innovation within the kind of like blockchain industry for a while. I think UK is doing it the right way in that they're just kind of like letting innovators innovate. US as well at the moment, though they are coming. I don't know. Gary Gensler's got his own agenda, but in general, they're kind of like letting people innovate. But the MiCA role in the EU, I just cannot. I don't think there's going to be innovation coming from the EU. I think the EU is going to be a follower, not a leader going forward. Because if you look at they're basically trying to regulate something that's not even developed yet.
So let me replay that back for those who may not necessarily know what some of those letters are. So MiCA is the markets in crypto assets. And so it's the regulation around the monitoring of cryptocurrencies and crypto payments, if I remember correctly. And part of it involves a thing called the travel rule, which is where you have to capture and identify where crypto has come from and where it's gone to. And I think they're demanding that goes beyond being just a wallet to an individual or a company now. So they actually want to know if there's a cryptocurrency transaction gone on, then who it was physically from, and who it was to. And I agree that that's quite constraining in some ways. And I'm seeing a lot of people complaining that, for example, in the UK, there's the UK Crypto Asset Register, because the UK FCA is acting as the kind of like KYC authority for crypto. And so they're insisting that any organization that does crypto business in some way with customers needs to register with them. And it's one of those crazy things that you have to be registered, but that doesn't mean you're regulated. But they're doing it in a way to try and be responsible around the crypto assets and that. But it brings in, it was interesting, you said,
you don't need to register.
Yeah, you need to register, but that doesn't mean you regulate it.
No.
But
in Europe, you don't need to register.
Yeah.
If you're launching a token in Europe using MiCA, you don't need to register.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the rules are very simple. Okay. If you want to launch a token in the European Union, MiCA says that there's a specific things from white paper and blah blah blah, marketing plan. You have to do all of those things that any company needs to do. What you need to do is, before you tell anyone that you're going to launch a token, yeah, all of that has to be clearly defined on a white paper, and you need to send the white paper to the regulator by email. Okay? Only need to send. You don't need to wait for anything for them to say it's okay. So it's just information. And then you can publish on your website, has to be published, and then you can launch a token. You can even start to raise money with SAFTs and all of that stuff, because it's quite of a gray area at the moment in the European Union, the approach that people use with SAFTs, yeah, sale agreement for future tokens, that's what a SAFT is. And there's no limit in the money that you can raise by doing that as well. So then you can, and by the way, this is no financial advice, I want to say, you just need to go and read it, okay? But what is really regulated, where you need a license, is if you are a central exchange, yeah, a SEX, if you are a custodian, so they separated, exchange can't be custodians anymore, they are super regulated and you need a license for them, or if you're launching a stable coin, yeah, which, by the way, there are banks in the European Union that are preparing to launch their own stable coins as well. Super, super regulated, all of those three. Yeah. So let's be clear about this. You only need a license for those three. Anything else, by the way, one of the things they do not account, and they say continue as you are, is NFTs. Anything with NFTs, metaverse, and DeFi. So they are looking now at DeFi. So DeFi is not regulated, is not forbidden. There's nothing that stops you from doing any DeFi in European Union. Of course, there are the usual MiFID II laws and AML and all of that stuff already existed anyway, So the laws are there for those type of things, yeah, but it's not regulated yet. Some of these things, NFTs are not going to be regulated. They already said, and DeFi, they are thinking how they're going to do it. I don't think that it's possible to regulate DeFi.
So NFTs. I was
just going to say that if anybody's interested, I think Latvia are going to do like a webinar or something like that on the 30th of September to try and explain the new rules coming in terms of the new regulation. So I did. It came.
It already came in July. It's effective in July.
It came in July it depends. It's a waterfall. So you have stable coins in July, and then you have 2025 for other things. But anyway, I don't really know a lot about it. But on LinkedIn, I did get a message saying that they're doing this free webinar. So I think Bank of Latvia. So if anybody's interested, probably search for that and can get sort of more information on it. But generally, the whole crypto industry are really not happy about the regulation. I don't know. Like I say, I don't know a lot about it. I'm not a lawyer, but a lot of the people within the crypto industry have been talking negatively about it. So that's what I can say.
I actually have everyone that I hear for is saying exactly the opposite. They absolutely love it because it means they can launch a token in the European Union without needing a license. So all of the people that I know are saying, "Hey, that's great,"
I think what I'll do is I'll probably go and I'll try and see if I can make it to that to that webinar being done by the Latvian government or Bank of Latvia, something like that, so that I can learn more about it. Just say there's a lot of misinformation, I'd say, out there. So what you're telling me now, JT, is new information, which is some good knowledge.
Yeah, look, I just to let you know, I actually was in Dubai in April, and I was speaking with a lawyer that created the first crypto law in the world, in Liechtenstein, and they became effective digital assets law in 2018, okay? And the European Union used that as the kind of how should I say, the carbon copy of, they changed quite a lot of it, okay? And I asked him, this looks great, man. Why isn't anybody talking about this? And he told me like this, people just don't know. And there's a lot of misinformation, like you said, Ken, people talking all sorts of things, yeah? So I actually posted before here a link, Gary, but about before, not today, but about the rules. If I find until the end of it's finishing now. So
yeah.
Not
to worry, but I'm sure people can go and search for it. I just wanted to throw one thing in the last minute though, because it was interesting that NFTs were mentioned, and you're saying about how there's no kind of like regulation being introduced for those. Except you probably saw the news during the week
OpenSea.
about OpenSeas in the USA, where the SEC have issued what's known as a Wells notice. And a Wells notice, for those who don't know, is basically a regulator saying, we think what you're doing is probably breaking the law, so please stop doing it, because we're probably going to prosecute you if you don't. And it's kind of an interesting one. So yeah, OpenSea's being a major platform for NFTs has been given this warning a few days ago, which means that the SEC is now going after NFTs, which is quite interesting. So maybe we'll pick up on that on future date.
I don't know how they can do it, to be honest. It's just silly. It's so silly, man. Anyway, let's have a conversation next week.
Exactly. A good one to say, we'll discuss that next week. Because we did say last week we did talk about digital identity a bit more, and I think we certainly did that. So going to have to close it off there. Say thank you as always, everybody. For those who are listening, hope you enjoyed it. For those who joined in, thanks to contributions as always. See you folks next week. Bye for now.
Bye.